Hello and welcome to Eastern Marshlands. My name is Eugene.
My name is TK
TK?
Jones.
Yeah. And we are coming to you live on YouTube, coming to you from Swamp to Stagnant Swamp. Check us out on eastmarshlands.com. And shout out to our patrons for supporting our show. Please consider pledging $1 on patreon.com/emlpodcast. So today, this is our book club episode, and tonight we're going to talk about a very important and interesting book called 10 Days That Shook the World by John Reed. A very famous description of the events of the October Revolution. In honor of a 100-year anniversary, we decided to take this book, but I'd like to announce the next book for the next month that we're going to read. It is Manufacturing Consent by NOAM Chomsky, and you can go, when the video is up and the audio is up, you can go in the description down below and check out the PDFs. And so, TK, let's first talk about the October Revolution, because it is a very, we already spent like 3 hours talking about October Revolution, right? But still, I believe we will still keep talking about this. Like,
I think
opinion,
people will be talking about the October Revolution for another 100 years to come, because it's an event that just rings true throughout every country, every labor movement in every country, every union, every socialist party, every slightly left-leaning person will say, "Ah, yes, I remember when I first learned about socialism when I was taught in school about the Bolshevik Revolution."
Yeah,
it's
pretty much.
It's an event that's never going to disappear into the halls of history. We will always be talking about it. Why, though, is probably the bigger question, because a few people will say it, will spin it as saying, "Oh, the Bolsheviks masterminded this intricate plan amongst like the top 3 or 4 of them to take over an entire empire and subjugate everybody." And others will say, "Oh no, it was a complete mess. It was a complete fluke, and all of a sudden the Bolsheviks suddenly took over and liberated the people and all the workers of the world." So I guess my question to you, Eugene, is like, what do you feel was the outcome, like how it went down and the outcome of the Bolshevik Revolution?
Well, I believe that Bolshevik Revolution is one of the most important events in, I would even say, human history, because it really was a moment that shaped 20th century. It's like, in my opinion, this sort of, I always support socialist revolutions, whatever ideology it is, because I believe ultimately the fight for the people, it's ultimately the fight for the people, and a real genuine revolution will always get support of any socialist, of any genuine socialist, because if you are honest to yourself and you see that there is a real rebellion going on, real revolution, not just, a coup d'etat sponsored by some foreign power, or, a temporary vacuum with a populist shouting something weird, about taking back our lands or something like that, something fake. A genuine revolutionary will recognize another revolutionary and another revolutionary movement. Therefore, I believe that October Revolution was such an example of such a revolutionary movement, and I wholeheartedly support this revolution. And I believe that it is also very important from the standpoint of world history, because, to quote late Christopher Hitchens, if it wasn't for the October Revolution, we would use not a Latin word for fascism, but a Slavic one. Because he said then, and everybody says, it wasn't for the Bolsheviks, it would be another force to take over, and that force would be military force. It would be another Kerensky marching on. Not Kerensky. Wait, what was this guy who rebelled? Not Kerensky was the head of the government.
Yeah,
right.
Kerensky was the head of the provisional government in Russia, who shared dual power with the.
Was it Kornilov?
Kornilov? I do know of the.
Yeah, it was Kornilov. Yes,
sorry.
and I remember I was talking about him. In the on our 100-year anniversary stream, but I've kept forgetting his name. So Kornilov was one of those, first military attempted coup d'etats in revolutionary Russia, in the Russian Republic, so-called.
I think it's important. Yeah. It's important to remember that there was there was a revolution in 1905 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
Was it 4 or 5? 1905.
Yeah.
There was a revolution in 1917 in February.
Yeah.
And then there was
style, which is March,
yeah.
normal, like our time.
There was a third revolution in October.
Yeah.
So there was
our November.
Yeah, it wasn't this quick change over from the Tsar directly to Lenin and the Bolsheviks. There was a period of almost a year where it looks like it could go one way or the other.
Republic. Yeah, bourgeois republic, basically.
And this bourgeois republic, which may have propped up capitalism, would have just, as we have seen with the Weimar Republic, it would have just decayed into fascism.
Oh, yes. And if it wouldn't decay into fascism, it would be even worse because, we should understand what was happening at the time. Just imagine you have those, a coup d'etat that could happen any minute, right? At any fucking minute, you can have a rebellion by the military who would invade you and install, they were already proto-fascists at the time, who were basically Russian Freikorps. Their names were the how is it in English? Black Hundreds?
Black Hundreds, yes.
Yeah, Black Hundreds.
Yeah,
the Black Hundreds, who are basically
quite often. Yeah.
Yeah. They are a great example of a proto-fascist movement that could be if they could take power, or any military could take power, like Kornilov and those types. This is what would be out of Russia. This, you have as a looming disaster waiting to happen. And on the other hand, you have a giant famine waiting to happen, because Russia was experiencing some extreme bullshit going down. And if it wasn't for the Bolsheviks, so many people would have died all over Russian Empire. Crazy amount, because we have the problem is that the government wasn't addressing it at all. Provisional government wasn't doing a thing to prevent either tragedies. They didn't want to solve they didn't want to give the land to the peasants, and they didn't want to do anything with it, to be honest. They were sitting around to win the war,
You had peasants who were trying to work the fields and starving, who would mass migrate into the cities. Either they would, have a choice between Moscow and Petrograd. There was soldiers on the front line who didn't want to fight anymore, who just wanted peace, who were abandoning the front line and heading to either, Moscow or the provisional government. Well, I say Moscow, I mean, they had a choice of either going to the Petrograd Soviet or the provisional government. And the peasants and the soldiers saw that the provisional government would not help them feed themselves, and they would prolong the war, and they would send the farmers back to the farms and the soldiers back to the front. So they said the clear choice is to go support the Petrograd Soviet, because the Bolsheviks were saying that they were going to feed people, that they were going to give land to the peasants, and they were going to bring peace to Russia. So there was a clear choice, and that's why there was waves of support towards the Bolsheviks, towards the 10 days that's shown in this book.
Exactly.
We also have
therefore, like,
we have in the comment section Radical Vlad stating the issue was not with food supply, it was with inflation. I was wondering if you could comment on that, Eugene.
Well, he said harvests were not awful in 1917. If we ignore the lost territories, the main problem was transportation and the inability of the Russian government to requisition grain. Yeah. And this is, I wasn't even, I understand, and I meant that, to be honest. Like, this is what I was saying, because they were not able to address so many problems, including the question of the war, question of the land, which Bolsheviks were demanding them to solve, which they couldn't do. This is actually one of those like tactics that we should really consider: demanding what is obvious, what is needed, but what the current system cannot give. Like, if it's like, just be direct. We should be direct in our demands. It's like, we want healthcare for all. We want decent income for everyone. We want to destroy unemployment and get the people off the streets. We want affordable houses, and we keep asking those things. And the government is like, we can't do this because it will undermine our interests as ruling classes, And the people are like, actually, we really, really want that shit. We want to stop the war. Great example with the Russian Revolution. And the government is like, wait, we have already talked to the people in the West, and we already agreed to keep on fighting until victory, not only over Germany, but then to transfer our soldiers to the south to win the war against the Ottomans. Because this is what the Bolsheviks have been talking in 1917. They were saying, you know what? Our government wants to keep fighting until we destroy both Germany, Austria, and Ottomans, to rob them of their riches and to enrich themselves, and to kill more Russian soldiers in the meantime. And the provisional government's like, no, it's not true, it's not true. And then the Bolsheviks take over, they get access to the archives of the provisional government. You know what? It was all true. So if it wasn't for the Bolshevik and the Brest-Litovsk peace, it would have been just terrible. It's like, weird you read, like, when I was younger, and I thought of provisional government as of like being a very humble attempt at creating a republic with democracy, I was like, no, that's a shame that they could have succeeded. It would be great if they succeeded. But then I read, about what they really did, and I'm like, my God, can you, like, what the fuck? Like, how can you do that?
I think with this, with that sort of endpoint in mind, and with 10 days, this 10 days book, John Reed interviewing so many different people of so many different groups. There wasn't just the Bolsheviks. There was also the Mensheviks. There was the larger Social Democratic Party, and then you had factions within the provisional government as well. It's amazing that the Bolsheviks, who had such a simple plan, were able to almost fight against all of these detractors and all these other factions around them, to be able to seize power, to be able to do something about there not being peace, land, or bread.
Yeah. And I'd like to quote, while we slowly transfer our discussion to discussion of the book, I'd like to give a couple of quotes. The first one is by Vladimir Lenin, that talks about the book. With the greatest interest and with never slackening attention, I read John Reed's book, 10 Days That Shook the World. Unreservedly, do I recommend it to the workers of the world. Here is a book which I should like to see published in millions of copies and translated into all languages. It gives a truthful and most vivid exposition of the events, so significant to the comprehension of what really is the proletarian revolution and the dictatorship of the proletariat. These problems are widely discussed, but before one can accept or reject these ideas, he must understand the full significance of his decision. John Reed's book will undoubtedly help to clear this question, which is the fundamental problem of the international labor movement. So, at the time, he saw this as one of the most important books to understand revolutions.
Because and this is Ilyevich Ulyanov, Vladimir Lenin, the big one.
Yeah, the big one.
Who was interviewed in this book, who read the book, who then gave a showering praise upon this book. It just it just shows how far John Reed actually got into the popular figures within the revolution. How it's later in the book as well that he I think mentions interviewing Kerensky. It's just amazing, and to have Lenin praise your book, it's it shows the mark of a good book, I guess. Sorry, I'm starting to ramble.
And by the way, it was banned in Soviet Union after that.
Yeah,
that's the best thing. It was banned during Stalin's reign. It's great. And I remember somebody was asking in the chat when we were just talking about the book during the stream. They was asking, I don't remember who it was, but it was asking like, why was it banned? I remember there was Stalin in 1924 said that reading his book talked too much and overstated the role of Trotsky. Therefore, and the point is that Trotsky, it is said, and the name of Trotsky and Lenin were known all over the world as the leaders of the revolution. Stalin is mentioned in the book twice, and so he really didn't like it, and the book was sort of banned, not outright banned, but it was never.
It's very frowned upon if you were caught with a copy. Would you say?
Yeah, it was like they didn't print it, and it was sort of on the list. It was on the list of the not really good books. And the next edition was published only in 1957 by the Polisdat, which is main political editorial Soviet thing that prints books, and it had the Lenin quote that I mentioned, and also the Nadezhda Krupskaya quote, who was Lenin's wife, and also one of the very important politicians of early Soviet Russia. I
guess a quote I would like to bring up is right at the very start, right in the preface, is this book is a slice of intensified history as I saw it. It does not pretend to be anything but a detailed account of the November Revolution, when the Bolsheviki, at the head of the workers and soldiers, seized the state power of Russia and placed it into the hands of the Soviets. So in that first little sentence there, we can really note that this is a sort of a timeline recounting of what happened through the eyes of John Reed. So occasionally, you'll get to a point where it's as a hypothetical. It's the famous armored car storming of the bridge and the post office, but because John Reed only saw the armored car drive past as he was making his way somewhere else, that's all you see. So you think it's about to go over how this armored car was able to rally thousands of people to take this bridge to cut off government troops that just went back inside their barracks. No, it's not that. It's John going to the shops, talking to a shop owner,
Yeah,
about like, oh, the price of bread
basically.
has dropped suddenly. I don't know why. Could it be to do with the Bolsheviks? I don't know. I'm just a simple bread seller.
I'm just a humble meme miner.
Yeah, yeah. But I
It
think that's
reminds me of
too.
a very nice TV series, that I would like to recommend to people, especially those who want to learn about American Revolution, about the Revolutionary War, a rebellion against the Brits. It's called HBO's John Adams. And why
Right,
I mention it is
yes, I've
because
watched that.
it's a mini series. It's really short. Like it's really cool. I really enjoyed it. And I remember I was listening to internet lectures on was Yale's lectures on American Revolution, and they mentioned the TV series. There, a professor said that she and a couple of other colleagues got together with a bunch of popcorn, ready to throw it at the TV screen because of how ahistorical it is. And she said it was actually rather good. The only problem she found with it is that John Adams was like, oh well, something's going to go down in Massachusetts, I better be there, and he's always there when something big is happening,
Yeah,
where he wasn't in real life.
it's like
It's like
he's like in one part of the
yeah,
city, and then he's like, "Oh, what's that? There's something big going down at Bunker Hill." All of a sudden,
I
he
better
like
be there. He
walks at
appears there.
Mach 1 to get to Bunker Hill to see it happen.
Yeah. So this is the problem with the TV series. He's everywhere. He was
Hmm.
everywhere.
Well, see,
Well, in
this
real
is
life, he wasn't everywhere.
this is a strength of the book, I think. Like
Yeah.
you're not gonna see that armored car taking the bridge, but you're gonna hear from the people that the revolution is gonna so largely affect what they think and feel, because
Yeah, and this is why
that's
this
yeah
yeah,
it's
and this
part
is
it's
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
sorry,
I'm
that's
very
part,
excited.
yeah, it's part of the why John Reed was there. He was there to report because he's a journalist,
Yeah.
and it
He
really
was
shows in
there
his
to
book.
report. Yeah, he was there to report for an American newspaper. Let me quickly check the name of it. Um, fuck, I closed it. He was there to report for the newspaper called magazine The Masses, which was banned right like before he was an assignment by the journal, and then the journal was closed because of the Espionage Act, which was basically an anti-communist act,
Was
the
it
first one.
was it closed down like when he was on his way into Russia?
It says it happened in 17, so I think it was I think it was while he was there. I'm not really sure
Hmm. Because
because it doesn't say here. I think it was when he was there, and then it was printed in another place.
there's
Yeah.
I don't really think it shows through in the book so much, but was there like even before like the Bolsheviks seized power and before the big
Hmm.
civil war with 10 or so nations sending armies to crush them, there was like international condemnation against the Tsar abdicating
Hmm.
straight up. Like was there backlash against this February revolution?
But there was a lot of backlash because, like, if you remember, it was so much shit going down with the whole war thing.
Mm.
There was First World War was going down, and for example, the Masses Journal was closed precisely because of the war thing,
Mm.
because they were anti-war, and it was banned to advocate for peace.
Oh
So,
yeah. So I
and therefore,
in preparation for this, I
yeah,
rewatched a movie called Reds, which is actually about
uh-huh,
John Reed and his wife, how they met, and then during the Russian Revolution, and then all the way up until John's death. Um,
hmm
when he first met his wife was interviewing him, and he was essentially talking about how uh, J.P. Morgan and all these other industrialists have loaned money to England and America So if the Kaiser wins, they don't get their money back. So that's why they're backing the war, and that's why certain people are backing the war. And in the movie, the actress who's playing the wife has this look on her face of like, oh, they'll never let me print this because it's so true. And like, I think they also, I looked into that as well, and it's there was big backlash against the Tsar abdicating during the February Revolution because they thought that straight away all the Russian soldiers would leave the front lines, and because Russia's out of the war, Germany could just turn all of its soldiers right around and head towards the Western Front. Which didn't happen straight away, but it happened later, especially with the Bolsheviks bringing about peace. But it's just it's interesting to note that I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. There's a spider that's crawling up the side of my wall, and I had to quickly run through the encyclopedia inside my head of if it was dangerous or not.
It's like in Australians.
Yeah, I know. Like,
that's what you get.
If we have to pause for a second whenever we see a live animal and think like, all right, if it's small, so it's probably poisonous. Because if it was big, it'd try to attack us. That's how it works essentially. If it's big, it'll attack you. If it's small, it'll bite you and you'll die from poisoning.
Fuck.
Hold on, let me. There we go. It's outside now.
Did you kill it? Oh, okay.
I didn't kill it. I just put it outside. It's not dangerous. Or at least I hope.
Okay. So where were we? To recollect the thoughts before we move on, I'd like to give a couple of announcements because we are like around halfway through the show. Tomorrow will be a very spooky day for me because I will be interviewing Paul Cockshott, Professor Cockshott, co-author of Towards New Socialism, whom we discussed on the book club. And this is amazing. I would like to say thank you to Mr. Cockshott for agreeing to be on Bolshevik Bistro.
He, along with like certain other people, are like the heavyweights of socialism and the labor movement and whatnot that you want to go and talk to right-wing reactionaries like Milo and Ben Shapiro, but they never do.
They never do. No.
Yeah, because like, you know, Ben will just go on and on about economics, but I just know that Paul Cockshott could just like, you know, deconstruct him then and there on everything. Like, good on you, Paul. Like, you've read the goddamn basic economics. Like, you've actually done it, and well, essentially, Cockshott was like picked up basic economics and was like, what is this like level 1 bullshit? I'm gonna go like hardcore level 80 on this.
Oh, yeah. So I'm sorry, my cat hit my microphone. Sorry, it really wants to play with it. No, you're not allowed. I'm sorry. So yeah. Cockshott is a heavyweight. He's a big boy, and he's a big boy in terms of his brain. He's a big brain in BoJack, and he's also a big boy and socialist. Like therefore, Comrade Cockshott,
heavyweight that could go for the leftist belt. What's
exactly.
From that old shit.
Interleftist Championship belt, I think.
The Interleftist Championship belt. The new challenger appears. Paul Cockshott. Intro music and runs down to the ring. Oh, it'd be great.
Yeah. So Radical Vlad in the chat says Towards New Socialism is a great book, and Cockshott is one of the best Marxian economists around at the moment. Can't wait for the interview with Cockshott. Sadly in short supply. I agree. And just a reminder to everybody who's listening to it, if it is not yet Thursday 9:30 Greenwich time, you can send your questions to me. Please send your questions to me that I could use to talk with Cockshott about. I already have some, and I'm looking for a bunch of interviews. Cockshott's blog, which is paulcockshott.wordpress.com, if you want to check it out.
I just want to help you out.
A bunch of text there.
I just want to help you
Yeah.
out here. Yes, Paul Cockshott has considered human nature, so you don't need to ask that one.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm not going to ask the trap question because somebody already asked me. I should ask him whether the traps are gay or not.
Oh my god!
I'm not going to ask that. I know this is one of the biggest questions of the internet left, but he's not an expert on that.
I said to myself, this is more of like a wholesome live stream. It's more of a serious one. I'll go with a different joke, and then you had to come out with that one. I'm like, God damn it! He beat me to it.
That's literally what the people ask me. This is the first question that came to me on Twitter.
Oh wow!
The person said, "All Trump's gay," but seriously, like, how do we democratically control such a system? Blah blah blah. So that it sort of went on to have a normal question. But I ask you to send me questions, topics to talk about, everything. Also, tune in. We'll chat in the chat, if you know what I'm saying. And has he considered reading Atlas Shrugged? I will ask. This is actually a question that I will ask him. Like, have you read Atlas Shrugged? Because, by the way, did you read Atlas Shrugged? TK.
I have not read Atlas Shrugged just yet.
I couldn't read it. Like, what the fuck?
I believe someone described it as a fantasy world in which the capitalist economy never busts, it only booms. And I'm like, hey,
yeah.
That sounds like capitalism only works on paper.
Basically.
And it's a book literally printed on paper. It's the perfect analogy.
Yeah. Oh, so let's get back to the 10 years that shook the world. Let's talk about the thing, and let's talk about sectarianism.
Yeah.
So the book was banned because of the lack of mention of Stalin and too much Trotsky.
Well, this
is
weird. This is the prominent people being interviewed in the book again. Just so happens to be Lenin and Trotsky and Kerensky, and not Stalin, because at the time Stalin was just some guy that robbed a couple banks to fund the revolution, who then wasn't doing too much. He was there, but he wasn't
not on the front lines. He was a very important person in the newspaper. Exactly, he was the original Trotskyist doing the newspaper shit.
Stalin was a Trotskyist? What?
Yes. And Trotsky was a Stalinist. Ooh.
Yeah.
I fucking hate it. So yeah. Basically, and this is the reason. Like, in Soviet Union, later, Stalin was seen as the favorite pupil of Lenin. He was his like right-hand man at the revolution. But when you read the book, it's not like this at all.
Well, again, this is mainly because John Reed at the time probably saw Stalin as like, oh, he's just the newspaper guy. I want to talk to the guy above him. I want to talk to the chairman of the Petrograd Soviet. Who is he? Oh, there's Trotsky. I want to talk to Trotsky, the big guy.
Yeah,
the one that's leading this whole thing. So that's probably why Stalin isn't mentioned as much. It's probably why a lot of people aren't mentioned, by virtue of the fact that John wasn't there to interview them, and possibly John thought, well, not that he didn't want to waste his time, it's that he didn't have time to interview it, because this book, when you read it, it's quite slow and procedural in that John Reed is recounting things as they happened, but there'll be little time jumps. There'll be jumps of like an hour or so, but it skips over so much, just because the revolution itself just happens so quickly. Because overnight, in our calendar, I think it was November 7th, it went down. It was all seized.
Yeah.
And I believe there's a quote in the book with Lenin saying, November, just updating the language to our calendar, November 6th is too soon. There's not enough people ready to run into the streets. The people aren't roused enough to take up arms with us. But and this is the weird part. November 8th is too late, because we would be too organized. There'd be too many people in the Petrograd Soviet arguing about what is to be done. It's sort of hinting at his his book and whatnot. So November 7th was the time to kick it off, and it's weird to hear from Lenin himself through the writings of John Reed that you can be too organized in a revolution. But I think going through the list of how many different parties there were, it sort of shows like if they waited to get the support of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, they'd have to wait like another 10 days, or to somehow convince the United Social Democrats Internationalists to form up with them. It'd take another 20 days. And I mean, there's I'll just list off a few political parties: the monarchists, the cadets, the group of public men, the Bolsheviki, of course, the Yedenstvo, the Socialist Revolutionary Party, the Left Socialist Revolutionaries, the Maximalists, and the list just goes on, essentially.
Right.
And it's sort of in a way showing how Lenin seized the opportunity to take what he had in terms of just the Bolsheviks to seize power, because as Lenin himself said, as was shown in the book, if he waited until November 8th, 9th, or the 10th, the moment would have been gone. And it just shows how quickly things move, and especially how it reads in the book, how you think it's very dry and dull in like this party meeting, and then suddenly time jumps to a meeting with the officer of the train that takes the supplies to the front line, that's like 10 miles away.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Radical Vlad has said in the comments, just getting a question in quick. It'd be good to hear Cockshot's opinion on Anwar Sheikh's theory of political economy and capitalism. CC3.
Okay, I'll get it through. I'll look into it, and if you, I'm not familiar with this person, Anwar Sheikh's. I don't know his theory. If you could link the precise book or precise like text, because I'll look into it and I will ask him. If you could link me something that I could base my research on, that would be great. So yeah, coming back to the book.
So I guess my question for you would be, from what you've read and using the book as the account, where do you think the Bolsheviks really secured their power?
Excuse me, once again, where the Bolsheviks what?
So at what point do you think the Bolsheviks had done it? They had taken control of, because they had stormed the Winter Palace, but I believe John mentions later on in the book that there were still sections of the city. There was still, provisional government members trying to rally, like back in Moscow and other places, trying to thwart the Bolshevik, uprising. I was just wondering where you thought the Bolsheviks really secured their power.
Technically, I believe we could say 1925 as a year.
Okay.
Really?
Good point.
Like, because it's really hard to pinpoint the revolution and the civil war that follows, where the revolution ends and where civil war begins. Because you could say that at the moment when you have strict borders, and you understand the front line of a civil war, when you know where your troops are, what cities are under control of the, for example, socialist and counter-revolutionaries, right? It's a good way to do it. But again, you have enemies inside of your territory who are conspiring against you during civil wars. Enemy newspapers, spies, loyalists, those people, they are everywhere. Therefore, it's really, revolution ends when the civil war ends. when you can claim that all the land belongs to the new government.
And that's very much out of the scope of this book as well.
Yeah, really, yes, because I think John Reed also understood that, because he planned this to be the first book in a series, and he wanted to continue it, and he wanted to call it From Kornilov to Brest-Litovsk, which when the peace between the Germany and Soviet Russia was signed. So, in my opinion, this is a very correct way to see it. Like, in many ways, the Bolsheviks completely retained the control when the Brest-Litovsk peace was signed. This is like from really, Kornilov was a very important event that spurred the uprising of the Bolsheviks, because everybody understood that it is the first in a line of rebellions, and it will. And the Soviets helped to suppress Kornilov's putsch, and after that, they understood it's time to take power, because we will get fucked if it keeps going. And so I believe this is why it's really it would work to say that this is the From Kornilov to Brest-Litovsk is the lifespan of a revolution.
So it's important to remember that if you're going to read this book, you're not going to get the entirety of the revolution. You're going to get just the 10 days that are mentioned. And if you want to read more about the revolution, you'll have to read more about the revolution, because it as you said, the revolution ends in 1925.
Yeah. Really, because it's about the context. It's about what happened before and what happened after. Like, that's far more important than the act of seizing power. Because why? What happened? What happened exactly? Like, those things are really important.
There's an interesting section where John... I say John as if I know him. Mr. Reed is talking
Comrade
to...
Reed. He's a comrade.
Reed. Our guy, John Reed, is talking to a factory worker, saying, and the factory worker is explaining, after the February Revolution, but before the Bolshevik one, but very close to it, they were worried that they were all going to lose their jobs. But they knew that they could, there's this idea of, we could seize the workplace and run it ourselves, but not for profit, but for improving our lives and whatnot. If only these damn factory owners would leave us be and we could run it. The funny thing was that the factory workers said, "Oof, good God, this revolution is happening. Let's close the factories and leave and wait for it all to blow over." And this factory worker was saying, luckily, the factory owners left, but they tried to lock up the factories and tell us not to work, and we said, no, we will work. Working is a right. We will work to improve our lives. And it goes deep into how the worker had gone from one city to another to secure a trade with another factory, because they were a textile factory and they were looking for cotton, to turn into textiles and whatnot, and they were going to trade for it because they had a surplus of this I think it was wood or something. They were going to trade it to this other place, and then this other place said, there's these trucks. We've gotten these trucks off of the military. We've traded with them to get it, and essentially it's without there being any capitalist class to suppress the workers suddenly, on their own, democratically decided to set up these networks of trade and support, and their lives were already being improved even before the October Revolution. But after that section of the book, what's shown elsewhere in history books as well, I believe, is the provisional government was actually beginning to suppress that. They were planning on moving against the unions and whatnot in order to secure their power, because a lot of the backers of the provisional government were capitalists who after the February Revolution, they suddenly were like, we can operate without having to do shit with the Tsar. We're our own thing, It's Ancapistan in 1917, lads.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's just really good to note that that was happening. Like, the workers on their own could do this.
Yeah, and it's a very great example of how amazing a revolution is. Like, revolution is such an crazy time, crazy fucking time. And if you look, a good example, a good read for people, pun intended, good read for people to check out is even if you're ML, it's Leon Trotsky's what's it called? Fuck, forgot.
Fascism, What It Is and How to Fight It?
No. It's a book that he wrote in 1920, when he was still in the power, during the Civil War. It's Terrorism and Revolution. It's a very nice response to CHOMSKY at the Second International, and there Trotsky explains. Like, when you read it, it is as if you're reading a Stalinist book, but it was actually Trotsky. And this is one of the books that Stalin really liked of Trotsky. And when Stalin died, this book was found at his table with a bunch of, pencil circles. He was reading it really carefully,
Yes,
basically.
this section is good. I like this. I don't like this by Trotsky section. We'll just cross that out.
Just not to look at it. Yeah, but the book is really cool in terms of it shows what mobilized workers are. Because 1920 was the worst fucking time to be in Russia. It was the war of communism. It was really hard. People worked but people voluntarily gave up weekends to work. They worked 8 hours on Saturday and Sunday for free. Because the front needed it,
Yeah. Because
they were not pressured to do
paradise was a massive threat to the capitalists of the world, so they sent everything they could against them.
Yeah.
So of course people had to work on the weekends to try to fight against it.
People agreed to, and this is the crazy part. The people are mobilized. This is why I say why the revolution is amazing in terms of reshaping the society. The society will agree if they support you to be reshaped, if I may say so.
There's a beautiful section, I think, in the book. I know it's in the movie, where John goes to this one of the larger gatherings of workers, and they're democratically trying to decide if they want to strike or not, because they're responsible for sending arms to the front line. And and they're saying, and it's shown in the movie that the Russian workers were worried that if they strike, the rest of the world would think of them as weak, because they want to, the imperialist Germans. But then the other workers were saying, no, we can't fight. We're just fueling the imperialism of the provisional government, blah, blah, blah. Until John is like, you should, he says to someone, to his left, you should go up there and say, the workers of America and whatnot, we would be proud of you if you went on strike, because you would stop this war machine. And the worker's like, you should get up there and say that. Oh, no, I don't have the credentials here. Credentials? Everyone has credentials. You have a voice. You must speak. Get up there. And he gets up there and he says, everyone, the workers of the world would love it if you went on strike. We would follow your example. And all the workers in that workplace were like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, woo. Go, John. Go revolution. They start singing the Internationale.
Yeah.
And I think it just shows like I've said that a lot. It just shows it's good to note. I don't know why I keep saying that, but it's a nice example of how this wasn't just a revolution of Lenin and Trotsky. This was a revolution of all the workers of Russia.
Yes.
Of anyone who was willing to shake off their chains, to take up a banner and seize their workplace, and especially on November 7th and within these 10 days, march with the People's Red Army into the Winter Palace to take back their nation and from the provisional government and build a new one that places the value on the workers.
Yes.
And it's in this
really
book
amazing.
Yeah, it's in this book, 10 Days That Shook the World by John Reed, that we can really see this happening.
Yes, and this is why Lenin said those things about the book. It is the book that you need to understand what the dictatorship of the proletariat really is. It is the people deciding to, now we will make the laws, now we will take power, now we will use it to
govern ourselves.
Yeah, govern ourselves.
Places.
Exactly. Radical Vlad in chat, he left the name of the review. I already Googled it and downloaded it. We'll check it out. Thank you. Production only ever really occurred in Moscow on any scale, and in Moscow only because of industry's war committees. The strikes everywhere were purely food strikes. The Russian leadership didn't trust the Russian bourgeoisie. Yeah, and yes, and because of all of that, the workers in the big cities were like, you know what? Fuck it. It's time for us to, to call shots. And this is what is so amazing about the revolution. And they literally said, fuck it, now we are in charge. And they took charge, and then it was successful. It's really amazing. And I may disagree with ultimately what happened with Soviet Union and the way the system worked, right? And the way some policies were enacted and how the whole, how the management of the country was undertaken. But it doesn't change the fact that I still support the revolution and I still support what happened in those 10 days that shook the world. Therefore, that's what I want to say. Like, it's still an amazing thing. And you've seen the movie Reds, right?
I have, yes.
And I haven't. Is it worth checking out? Is it anti-socialist or is it okay?
Oh, it's oh my god, it's really good. It doesn't harp on about how it turned into this terrible thing in the Soviet Union. No, it doesn't do that. It doesn't bash it, but it doesn't necessarily prop it up either. And it focuses a lot more on the life of John Reed and his wife, and not just the revolution in Russia. But it has people called the witnesses, and it's occasionally has interviews from people who were there, who met John Reed, who were alongside John Reed in the Socialist Party split in America.
Yes.
People who were on the front lines of Petrograd as they marched into the Winter Palace, that kind of stuff. And it's very interesting. I wouldn't say Reds is a movie made from John Reed's book, but there is a section in it where it is.
Okay.
Because they start
the one that is about the revolution, basically.
Yeah, they start quoting the book verbatim towards the end of part 1 in the movie. It's actually quite a long movie.
Really?
But yeah, I would highly recommend.
I still want to check it out.
I would highly recommend 10 Days That Shook the World, especially because it is a first-hand retelling of what happened. It's that kind of history that we should hang on to, because if we want to take this and apply it to where we are now or the future, we have to see it through the eyes of the people it will most affect. And that's sort of that's what you get from reading this book, or what I got from reading this book. John Reed was very oh, that's very well and good, Mr. Lennon. I better go check with the factory worker that will be affected by this policy. And he goes direct to the factory and talks to the factory workers face to face.
Yes.
And it's that kind of stuff we should be doing more of. I'll just jump down from my soapbox, preaching some what is it called? Platformism.
Yes.
That's the one. But yeah, Eugene, would you recommend this book?
Oh, I'm sorry. It was my mistake. I would recommend this book because if you really want to understand what was happening and why Bolsheviks did what they did, you should read the book. Because despite the fact that it's a journalistic work that is in it's in the list of the most important journalist works of the 20th century, it is also written by a person who was sympathetic to the Bolsheviks. So, and what you can expect of that is a work that is neutral, but also explains the motivations of the main force, in my opinion, of the revolution, the Bolsheviks, because they are ultimately the ones who took charge. Therefore, I believe that it's important to read it for people who want to really get into what was going down in Petrograd. And so, yeah, I really recommend it. It's a really good read. And it's a good read if you have only basic understanding of the revolution. Get into it.
To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand the Russian Revolution.
Yes. Yes. Oh, so is that it? I think it is.
I think we've said all we can about this book.
Yeah.
It's a very good book. I suggest everybody gives it a read. There's
so before we please.
There's PDFs online. If you can get yourself a physical copy, sometimes the physical copies will have reprints of the articles that were first shown in the book. Because John Reed actually got newspaper clippings from newspapers from around Petrograd and put them in his notes to have them printed in the book.
Yes.
Occasionally, these newsprints are excluded, so if you can get a copy with them in, that's much better, because then you get a real sense of context to what's happening.
Great. So, is that it? I think that's it.
Yeah,
Let me just quickly before we go, I'd like to again state that the next book club is Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky. And it is sort of, a continuation of our talk that we had with TK Jones at our last Radio Silent podcast, where we talked about social media and the implications of censorship, implications of how it affects our lives and how it affects how big it is, how big of a thing social media is. And this is talking about the same topic from the standpoint of political economy. It's a very important book to understand modern media, and we will be discussing it. Let me quickly check my calendar so that I will know when exactly. So let's say 1, 2, 3. 7th of January. Will it work for you, TK? It's Sunday, 7th of January.
7th of January.
Yeah.
I might actually be busy then.
Okay, then what day? Saturday?
It might have to be the 14th of Sunday.
14th of Sunday. Works perfectly. Let's do 14th January.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, 14th January 14th, 2018. This one we'll be discussing the book. You can get the PDF in the description. I remember checking for audiobook. I couldn't find it. If you happen to come across it, please feel free to send it to me, and I will link it. I write a letter saying Chomsky is a great analyst of modern society, and American consent is great, but his analysis of Bolshevism are off the wall. Fascism. Well, we all have our disagreements and sectarian debates, and whatever. Let the man speak his thing. I haven't heard him accusing of Leninism of being. Yes, I haven't heard that of him doing that. I don't really agree with that, but whatever. Like,
we'll save that for another time.
The book is great. Yes, the book is great. So, is that it? I think that's it. Before we go, I'd like to show off a couple of things that I have on my soundboard now. If you want to recommend a funny sound, feel free to do so. We have this now. Really nice applause.
Nice applause.
We have this one. This is very nice. It's when you see a reactionary, you just press it. It's really great. And yeah, that's all the things that I have added.
Cool new sounds to show up during live streams now.
Exactly. So, TK, is that it?
Yeah, that's it. I think it's a good time to wrap up.
Okay, thanks you, Radical Vlad. Thank you for listening to the podcast, to our book club, and we will see you. I will see you tomorrow on Bolshevik Visual with fucking Cockshot, and yeah, and oh, by the way, announcement: me and Socialism and Barbarism this Saturday will be having an AMA on politics server, politics and philosophy Discord server. And you can go to the link in the description of the video and audio to check out the channel where we'll be talking. And there'll be a lot of fascists. There'll be a lot of people of different ideologies. And they'll be talking to me and Bobby about different stuff. So I hope to see you there. And I hope you will have a good time. Have a good time. Have a good rest of the week, and we will have so much shit to cover for this week. So much content. So yeah, that's pretty much it. More to say.
All right.
Well, I will now do the outro. Right.
Catch you all later. Thanks for watching, guys.
Bye bye.